They paraded treaties, signed declarations, and broadcasts promising peace that was meant to heal a galaxy still bleeding from centuries of conflict. To many, those words felt like dawn after a long night. To Captain Elias Rourke, they were nothing, more than a bandage on a wound too deep to close. He had seen too much to believe in easy endings. The Resolute, his patrol frigate, moved slowly through a field of wreckage that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Twisted hulks of warships drifted like tombstones, their hulls scorched black and riddled with holes. This sector had been the site of one of the last great battles, where fleets of both sides had annihilated one another until nothing but silence remained. It was a place few dared to enter now, too many ghosts, too many memories. But Elias and his crew had been ordered to sweep for survivors, raiders, or hidden weapons caches. At first, it seemed like every other patrol. Then the sensor officer stiffened. "Captain, I'm picking up a faint distress beacon." Elias leaned forward in his chair. "Coordinates?" The officer's hands moved quickly across the console. "Bearing 327 Mark IV. Signal is weak, almost like it's been deliberately masked. Could be a trap." Elias's jaw tightened. Pirates often used false beacons to lure in rescue ships. But something in the erratic rhythm of this signal, flickering, stuttering, fading, felt different, not manufactured, more like a heartbeat on the edge of death. "Bring us in," Elias ordered. The Resolute maneuvered through the debris until the source became clear, an enemy cruiser, its hull half collapsed, floating dead among the stars. Scorch marks ran across its length, and parts of the ship glowed faintly where fires had raged in the vacuum. "Life signs?" Elias asked. The medic scanned. "Nothing clear. Too much interference. But that beacon is definitely active inside. The captain hesitated only a moment. The war had ended, yes, but he remembered the way enemy soldiers had treated prisoners. If there was even one soul left alive in that wreck, it was worth the risk. "Prepare a boarding team," he said. "I'll lead it." They cut through the high, fractured hull with plasma torches, the hiss of melting metal echoing in the empty corridors. The ship's interior was a maze of ruin, walls buckled inward, sparks flickering in the dark, and the silence of death pressing on every step. The beacon grew louder as they pushed deeper, guiding them to a sealed bulkhead. The door was reinforced with layers of coded locks, nothing like the makeshift barriers scavengers might use. This wasn't just a storage room. Someone had wanted whatever was inside to remain untouched. "Get it open," Elias said. The engineer worked quickly, overriding the ancient security protocols. With a groan of tortured metal, the door slid open. The beam of Elias's wrist lamp pierced the shadows, then stopped. In the corner of the small chamber, huddled against the wall, was a figure. Not human. Her skin shimmered faintly, even in the weak light, a pale silver blue marred by dark scars that crisscrossed her arms and legs. Her frame was thin, too thin, as if months of starvation had stripped her nearly to the bone. Shackles clung to her wrists and ankles, leaving raw, inflamed marks where she had struggled against them. Her hair, if it could be called that, hung in tangled strands, translucent like spun glass. As the light touched her, her eyes opened. Large, liquid, glass-like orbs locked on Elias with raw fear. For a heartbeat, she did not move, as if unsure whether the figures before her were real or another cruel trick. Then her lips parted, and a sound escaped, faint and broken. Alive. Still. The translator struggled to catch the word, but the meaning was unmistakable. Elias stepped forward slowly, lowering his weapon. His gut twisted. This wasn't a prisoner in the usual sense. This was a test subject. The walls of the chamber were etched with markings, notes, diagrams, devices that hummed faintly with forgotten energy. A laboratory disguised as a cell. His first officer whispered, horrified. "They experimented on her." Elias ignored the officer. He knelt down carefully, trying to make himself less of a threat. The girl flinched but didn't retreat further. There was nowhere left to go. "You're safe now," he said softly, knowing the translator might warp his words but hoping his tone carried what language could not. Her eyes flickered with something: fear, disbelief, and somewhere beneath it, a spark that had not been extinguished despite everything done to her. "Get her out of those chains," Elias ordered, his voice firm. As the crew worked, he made a silent vow. She wasn't just another mission. Not just another casualty of war. He hadn't found a prisoner. The alien girl was brought aboard the Resolute in silence. She didn't resist the crew as they carefully freed her from the shackles and wrapped her in a thermal blanket, but she didn't speak either. Her wide, glass-like eyes flickered between each human face, as though weighing whether these strangers were rescuers or just a new breed of captors. Elias stayed by her side, walking with the medics all the way to the infirmary. He noticed the way her thin arms trembled beneath the blanket, the way her shoulders curled inward like she was bracing for a blow. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt since his first years as a soldier, an anger not at enemies or battles, but at cruelty itself. Dr. Senna, the ship's chief medic, gave her a thorough scan. The results made even the seasoned doctor pale. "She's severely malnourished," Senna said quietly, "and dehydrated. Tissue damage on her wrists and ankles. Suggests prolonged restraint. I'm also detecting traces of foreign chemicals in her bloodstream, some kind of experimental compound. I don't know what it was meant to do, but her body's been fighting it for months." Elias clenched his fists. "Will she live?" Senna hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, with care. But her body isn't the only thing in pieces. Whatever she went through, that will take longer to mend." The girl didn't respond to questions, not at first. She flinched when anyone came too close. She refused food for nearly 2 days, until the medics found a nutrient blend her body tolerated. Even then, she sipped it like every drop might be poisoned. Her silence weighed on the crew, who whispered in the corridors about the strange, fragile being they had rescued. Elias didn't blame them. She was alien in every sense, her shimmering skin, her crystalline eyes, her frail frame. But it wasn't her otherness that unsettled them. It was the brokenness. Soldiers were used to survivors with scars, but this was different. This was someone who had been reduced to the edge of nothing and still somehow endured. He made a decision then. She wouldn't be treated as a curiosity or a burden, or worse, a piece of evidence. She was a person, and she deserved the dignity of being seen as such. So he visited her. Not as her rescuer, not as her captain, just as Elias. He sat in a chair by her bedside in the infirmary and talked. At first, it was one-sided. He spoke about the ship, the stars they passed, even stories from Earth. Oceans so vast they seemed endless, forests older than empires, cities that gleamed with light even in the dead of night. She never answered. Sometimes she looked at him, sometimes she didn't. But he kept talking, day after day. On the 5th evening, as he described the sound of Terran rain against a metal rooftop, she whispered a word. Rain, the translator, flickered, struggling to parse the sound, but the meaning came through. Elias smiled faintly. Yes, water falling from the sky. Cold, steady, sometimes violent, sometimes gentle. People find peace in it. Her head tilted, as though trying to picture something she had never known. That was the first crack in her. Silence. Gradually, more words followed. She revealed her name, Leora. She spoke it hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to carry it anymore. When Elias repeated it, softly, carefully, she stared at him as though surprised he acknowledged it at all. One night, when the ship sailed through quiet space, she spoke more. Her voice was low, brittle, but steady. They wanted to see how much pain could be endured, she said. Others were taken, tested, changed. I was last. Elias didn't ask who they were. He already knew the kind of enemy who had filled cages instead of coffins. Instead, he said, "But you endured." She looked at him with those crystalline eyes, shimmering with both disbelief and something else. Something fragile. Hope. Elias brought her small things, a blanket woven from soft Terran fibers, books translated into her language, even old Earth music that filled her quarters with gentle tones. At first she rejected them, shoving them aside. But little by little, she began to accept. The blanket stayed on her shoulders. The books found their way into her hands. The music, she listened to it in the dark when she thought no one was watching. When she finally asked him why he had saved her when it would have been easier to leave her behind, Elias answered simply. For weeks, Leora's progress gave the Resolute's crew hope. She walked the halls instead of hiding in her quarters. She learned fragments of human language, speaking halting words without relying entirely on the translator. She even began to eat with the crew at mealtimes, though she still flinched at sudden laughter or loud noises. But the scars of her past lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest crack to bleed through. It happened one night during the ship's quiet hours. The corridor lights had dimmed, and most of the crew were asleep when a shrill alarm jolted Elias awake. He ran to the infirmary where the sound originated and found chaos. Leora was on the floor, her body contorted in panic, eyes wide as if she was back in that dark cell. She screamed in her own language, words tumbling too fast for the translator to keep up. Medics tried to restrain her gently, but she thrashed with a strength that shocked them all. She had been frail for so long, yet fear had made her fierce. Elias pushed past the medics and dropped to his knees beside her. "Leora." "Look at me," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Her eyes darted wildly until they landed on him. Recognition flickered, but it wasn't enough. She struggled harder, whispering broken phrases. Cages, knives, gone, 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 without hesitation. Elias pulled her into his arms. She fought at first, fists striking weakly against his chest, but he held firm, not as a captor, but as an anchor. "You're safe," he murmured, over and over, until the fight drained from her body, and the trembling remained. Hours passed. He stayed with her until exhaustion claimed her at last. Even then, he didn't leave. He sat on the infirmary floor, her head resting against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Elias forgot about his duties as captain. He was just a man holding another soul together. The following morning, Leora refused to meet his gaze, ashamed, perhaps, or afraid he had seen too much of her brokenness. But Elias didn't press her. He carried on as though nothing had changed, giving her the space to recover. Slowly she returned to herself, though the shadows in her eyes grew deeper. It was a reminder. Healing wasn't a line moving upward. It was a storm, surging and receding, and the only way through was patience. Yet her past wasn't the only shadow stirring. The Resolute was not alone in the stars. Whispers began to reach them through intercepted transmissions, rumors of raider, fleets moving with unusual coordination, of enemies once thought shattered still clinging to power. Elias dismissed most of them at first. The galaxy always bred opportunists in the aftermath of war. But then intelligence arrived from command. Groups loyal to Leora's captors were hunting survivors. "They can't allow the truth to spread," Elias muttered as he read the report in his quarters. "If she speaks, their crimes are exposed." It wasn't paranoia. It was inevitability. The attack came sooner than expected. The Resolute was charting a quiet sector when alarms blared across the bridge. Multiple contacts emerged from the edge of the system, ships too heavily armed to be common pirates. Their weapons powered up instantly, targeting the Resolute with chilling precision. Elias's crew scrambled to battle stations. Plasma fire lit the void, shaking the frigate's hull. It was clear from the first volley, the attackers didn't want resources, didn't want prisoners. They wanted one thing: Leora. As the battle raged, she appeared on the command deck, her face pale but her steps steady. Elias turned sharply. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." "They want me," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But I will not go back." Before he could stop her, she moved to a console. Her slender fingers danced across the interface with surprising confidence. The translator struggled to keep up as she explained what she was doing, identifying flaws in the raider ship's formations, weaknesses in their energy conduits, tricks she had learned while living among her captors. "Target their aft relays," she insisted. "Fire when their shields cycle. Now!" Elias gave the order. The Resolute's cannons roared, slamming into the enemy flagship with perfect timing. The ship shuddered, systems cascading into failure. One by one, the other raiders broke formation, retreating rather than face destruction. When silence returned, the bridge crew erupted into cheers, but Elias only looked at Leora. She was shaking, yet her chin was high. She had fought, not to escape, not to survive, but to protect. In that moment, Elias understood something profound. She was no longer just a victim of the past. She was taking the first steps toward reclaiming her future. For the first time since, he had found her. She had chosen to stand against her captors, and Elias realized she wasn't healing alone anymore. She was fighting, alongside him, alongside his crew, alongside humanity itself. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, Lyra slept without terror clawing at the edges of her mind. The cave was cold, but the blanket Jacob had given her held warmth. Not just physical warmth, but something that felt like safety. When she awoke, the faint fire still glowed, and Jacob sat not far away, working quietly with his tools. He didn't notice she was awake at first, and she took the moment to study him. He wasn't like the wardens of her prison, all barked orders and cruel stares. He was rough, yes, scarred and battle-hardened, but there was no malice in the lines of his face, only weariness and a strange patience she didn't understand. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. Why was he helping her? "Morning," Jacob said softly, not looking up from the piece of equipment he was repairing. She startled, realizing he had known she was watching him all along. "How's the leg?" "It aches less," she admitted, pulling the blanket tighter around her thin frame. The truth was, she felt lighter than she had in years. He had washed the blood from her wounds, bound them, and even given her water flavored faintly with something sweet. She almost felt guilty, as though she didn't deserve kindness after so much pain. Jacob stood and crouched near her, checking the bandages. His touch was careful, respectful, never lingering too long, never making her flinch. "Healing. Fine, you'll walk again, but not if you keep hiding your pain." He gave her a half smile, one that almost looked tired. "Humans have a saying, pain shared is halved. You don't need to carry all of it alone." Those words struck deeper than he knew. She had never been given the chance to share her pain. To her captors, her suffering was a trophy. To the other prisoners, a reminder of their own helplessness. But here, with Jacob, she felt as though speaking might actually matter. Later, as he prepared another small meal, she finally broke the silence. They took me when my world fell. I don't even remember how long I was there. Every day was..." Her voice faltered. Jacob didn't press her. He just stirred the pot, waiting. "Every day was a choice," she forced out. "Obey, or be broken further. I chose survival. But sometimes, I think I was already broken." She trembled, ashamed of the words. Jacob didn't look at her with pity. Instead, he placed the spoon aside and said, "You survived. That doesn't make you broken." It makes you stronger than they ever wanted you to be." The words felt impossible, almost foolish, but something in his tone made her believe. Her eyes stung with unbidden tears, and she quickly turned away. But Jacob said nothing more. He simply returned to the stew, letting her cry silently. That evening, after they ate, Jacob set his rifle aside and taught her a breathing technique he had learned from a medic back in his wars. "You're shaking in your sleep," he told her gently. "Your body's stuck in fight or flight. This will help." At first, she resisted. It felt ridiculous, sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, trying to breathe slowly as instructed. But Jacob demonstrated alongside her, his own breaths steady and grounding. To her surprise, her chest loosened, and her mind quieted. For the first time in years, she felt she could control the shadows clawing at her. As nights turned into days, she found herself speaking more. Not of all the horrors, those were wounds still too raw, but of her people's songs, their oceans, their way of planting lights in the sky during festivals. Jacob listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding with quiet respect. In return, he told her of Earth, its forests, its storms, its unyielding resilience. She realized then that his world, like hers, carried scars. Perhaps that was why he understood her so well. Slowly, the girl who had been nothing more than a prisoner began to emerge again. Her eyes held more than fear now. They held sparks of curiosity, of life daring to return. She even laughed once, softly, when Jacob cursed at burning their meal. The sound startled them both, but Jacob only smiled, as though he had been waiting to hear it. Healing was not quick, nor was it easy. Nightmares still haunted her, and trust still wavered. But with Jacob's steady presence, the darkness within, her no longer felt endless. She was beginning to learn that shattered things could be mended, not erased, but reforged. And Jacob, though scarred himself, seemed to understand how to hold broken pieces until they found their shape again. In those fragile, flickering moments, an unspoken bond formed between them, not savior and victim, not soldier and alien, but two survivors, each carrying shadows, each offering light. The night after Lyra's testimony, Earth felt different to her. She had spoken words she never imagined she could, truths that had once been sealed behind chains, silence, and the cruelty of her captors. For the first time, the universe listened, not as a judge, but as an ally. Daniel stayed by her side through it all, even when the galaxy's eyes bore down upon her. He didn't leave her once, not when her voice cracked under the weight of memory, not when silence stretched too long. His hand had always been there, sometimes holding hers, sometimes simply resting nearby, a quiet promise that she was not alone. But peace, as always, was fragile. The Council had voted to dismantle the Zarkathan slaver network, but fragments of the Empire remained. Ships still prowled the void, raiding colonies, searching for weaknesses. And though the galaxy now condemned them, not all dared to fight. Some worlds turned away, fearful of retaliation. Others whispered that it wasn't their war. Earth, however, had chosen differently. Daniel's people stood taller than most, their voices fierce, their resolve unbroken. They declared that no species deserved chains. And that, Lyra realized, was why she had been found by him and not by another. Humans were not perfect. They had their scars, their struggles, but they had a stubborn refusal to bow to cruelty. As days passed, the council chamber grew quieter, but the world outside grew louder. News networks played her speech endlessly, painting her as a symbol of resilience. For some, she was a beacon of hope. For others, a reminder of how deep cruelty could cut. She struggled to carry the weight of both. Daniel noticed. One evening, as they walked along the coast outside the safe house, he spoke gently. "You don't have to be a symbol if you don't want to, Lyra. You've done enough." She stopped, the sea breeze tugging at her silver-white hair. But if I don't stand, others will fall. They'll be taken, shattered, just like me. Daniel turned toward her, eyes fierce. Then we'll stand together. You don't have to carry it alone. Something shifted inside her then. Not the sudden collapse of fear, but a gentler release, like the first light breaking through a storm. She had lived so long thinking she was only what her captors had left behind, broken, scarred, diminished. Yet here was a man who looked at her and saw more, not a prisoner, not a weapon for politics, just her. In the weeks that followed, Lyra began to heal in ways she never thought possible. She spoke to survivors, shared moments of quiet strength, and built bonds where once there had only been isolation. Daniel often accompanied her, but sometimes he stepped back, letting her voice shine brighter than his presence. He understood when to hold on and when to let her stand tall. Their bond deepened, not born of pity or obligation, but of something far rarer, trust. She laughed again, awkward and unsteady at first, but real. She began to dream not only of vengeance against slavers, but of futures, hers and perhaps theirs together. The galaxy, too, began to change, slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. Former slaves found homes on worlds that opened their doors. Human ships patrolled the routes once dominated by Zarkathan raiders. For every voice that doubted, another rose in defiance, emboldened by the truth Lyra had spoken. And then came the day she never expected. The council offered her a seat among them, a permanent role as ambassador and representative of the freed peoples. When she received the message, her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fear. Could she do it? Could someone who had once lived in chains carry the weight of countless others? She looked at Daniel, searching his face for the answer. You don't have to say yes, he said softly, but if you do, I'll be right there. Always. In his voice, she heard no demand, no expectation, only truth. And in that truth, she found her decision. Lyra accepted. Not because she was unbroken, not because she had all the answers, but because she now knew that being shattered did not mean being destroyed. She had been found when she thought herself lost, lifted when she thought she could never rise, and now she could be that light for others. On the day she walked into the council chamber as a representative, she wore no chains. Instead, she carried scars visible on her arms and face, unhidden. A statement. This is who I am, and still I endure. Daniel watched from the gallery, pride shining in his eyes. The galaxy saw a survivor. Daniel saw a woman who had chosen to live, and in that moment, Lyra realized the truth of her journey. She had been found not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, not even as a symbol. She had been found as herself, shattered but alive, broken but becoming whole again.